Welcome to another episode of the Listen and Learn series. In this episode, we're going to specifically be discussing environmental justice. And when that topic comes up, for many of us, we think about air pollution, the EPA, just quality control over those areas. But I'm specifically going to talk today about Cancer Alley, about Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis, and just overall how environmental protections does not look the same for all communities. So, if you don't know what Cancer Alley is, let me tell you a little bit about Cancer Alley. I will begin by saying this topic definitely resonates with me because I was born and raised in what is known as Cancer Alley. Essentially, this is an 85-mile stretch of land between New Orleans and Baton Rouge. If you've ever flown into MSY, into New Orleans Airport, Louis Armstrong International Airport, as you're landing, you can see the chemical plants in the distance, and oftentimes the pollution that is being emitted from these large machineries at these plants. And it looks like cloud funnels, if you will. And again, maybe I'm biased because I know they're there. So anytime I've flown into MSY, I have a habit of looking in that direction because I can notice the bridge, which is close to where I was born and raised, as well as those chemical plants. So essentially, that 85-mile stretch known as Cancer Alley, it flows a little bit along the river as well. So within Cancer Alley is the infamous River Road that also flows in that direction. So you see these pollution plants and clouds and chemicals. I've heard that these plants, they let us know that they're emitting chemicals. We know that, but they'll say that those chemicals have been known to not be able to be proven to cause harm. But let me tell you this fact. Louisiana is known to be the home of oil, gas, chemical plants, and other companies as the like. And that's likely the reason why Louisiana is known to have extremely toxic air, including the studies that say it's likely one of the most toxic places in our country. So this Cancer Alley stretch that I'm talking about houses close to 100 of those chemical plants. Louisiana is known to have about 200 chemical plants. But let me give some history about the plants in that area in general. The Cancer Alley route is known to have been in the slave days heavily plantation populated areas. Of course, when slavery was ruled to be illegal, those areas then became known for sharecropping. It was around the early 1930s, 1940s that plants, these chemical plants, began to make their homes in these areas. Because of the history of the plantations being placed there, even post slavery, many of these areas were known to be heavily populated Black communities, and those are the people who live closest to these plants. So even if the stats show that these parishes that run along Cancer Alley has more than just Black people living there, the Black people are typically situated in a closer proximity to these plants. So many of these companies, I'm going back to the companies, many of these companies, when they begin to make their homes in the territory known as Cancer Alley, initially and historically, those jobs were designated for white men, white people who did not live near these plants. In fact, many of them would take the commute in for the job. And I can tell you personally, growing up in that area, I'll tell my example of how I view the chemical plants. Louisiana is known to rate their public schools across the state. And St. Charles Parish public schools, where I was born and raised, typically are known to have higher ratings. And I was always told that the school has more tax dollars for academics because of the location of the chemical plants. So as a young girl growing up, I always viewed it as a benefit that I was fortunate enough to live in St. Charles Parish because we had access to the educational resources as a result of these chemical plants. Little did I know, we also had access to the pollution that those chemical plants were known and proven to put out. Also, I can tell you personally, I have a lot of family members, a lot of friends. I have a lot of people who I know who work at those chemical plants. And I'm not talking about a job here or there. I'm talking about, I know people close in my family who have retired from these chemical plants, and just overall looking at the bigger impact. And as I'm starting to learn about Cancer Alley in the last, say, 15 to 20 years and the impact that it has on us. Like I said, I was born and raised in St. Charles Parish. I have many family and friends who remain in St. Charles and St. John the Baptist parishes. So although I live in Minneapolis now, this is very personal to me. I can think of growing up, there's a city called Taft, Louisiana. Till this day, I can remember vividly what that city smells like. If you pass through Taft, which is a very small city, it's an egg smell. So for all of my viewers who are in Louisiana, you know that egg smell that I'm talking about. Because if you're passing by Taft on the River Road, when you get really close to the graveyard that's housed in the midst of these chemical plants, that overwhelming smell cannot be denied. This is beyond just my experience. There have been many studies that have revealed that Cancer Alley is known to have higher rates of respiratory issues and cancer for the people, the residents who actually live there. Studies have shown that if you live in this area, you have a 50 times greater chance of getting cancer in your life. Most recently, St. John the Baptist Parish was known globally, they were known because it was said that they had the highest COVID-19 death rate per capita. Now, that's no surprise to me if we're talking about these chemical plants that are known to cause respiratory issues, asthma, lung disease, heart disease, and things like that. These are the very same organs that we're talking about are impacted by COVID-19. There are many documentaries out there about Cancer Alley. I'll share a few links in the description for this video, but I would encourage you to do some digging into this Cancer Alley area. Another very well-known environmental crisis is related to Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis. So if you don't know about Flint, let me tell you in short. After officials repeatedly continue to dismiss claims that the people who live there, the residents, were making, suggesting that they were getting sick from the water, the residents eventually decided to take action on their own. So essentially, for more than a century, the Flint River, which flows directly through the heart of Flint, Michigan, it served as the official waste disposal site for treated and untreated water. And that in itself, if you think about the idea that a waterway having raw sewage, the city's waste treatment plant, and just overall the impact that this can have, it's not hard for us to understand how the water had the issues. I remember watching a documentary about Flint, and the residents were showing the color of the water, the smell of the water, and looking at the history of Flint. Flint was known to be a very prosperous American city. At one time, it was known to have a booming auto industry, but now the current population is majority African American. Over 50% of the population is African American, and almost 50% of the people in Flint also are residents who income would place them below the poverty line. I read a study that said 1 in 6 of the homes in the city have been abandoned. And so in the last few years, we've been hearing a lot about the Flint water crisis, where residents are reporting the look, the smell, the taste, and other issues with the discoloration of the water. And so now we're being forced to pay attention. Now, although Flint is getting the attention, I read a study that suggested that it's not just Flint. There are many other underprivileged communities like Flint that are having issues with something as simple as water and air, but those are not the things that are getting attention. You'd be amazed if you watch some documentaries on the EPA. I've heard race and waste, and how racial and ethnic communities have and continue to be beset by poverty. So basically, we look at the poor housing and educational qualities that are provided, and these communities cannot afford typically to just say, we're going to leave, or they don't have the privilege often to put their priority on fighting lack of quality air or water. They're too busy having to focus on other survival issues, such as just the luxuries of existing, having to go to work to be able to provide shelter, food, clothing, education for them and their families. In a previous video, I talked about redlining, and there's been a correlation to these areas that have the higher levels of pollution and the like. The higher levels of unclean water and natural resources are said to be areas that typically were known to be redline areas. I can talk a whole lot about this. Like I said, this hits home to me, but I'm going to close with telling a personal story. So when I was in law school, I clerked at a law firm in Baton Rouge, and that law firm was known to represent the defendant, the chemical plants, in any cases against it. So where I'm from, it's very common for there to be chemical explosions or chemical expels, and the citizens, the companies will then send representatives out into the communities to tell the residents, hey, we had an explosion. There's no harm to you, but we'll settle with you. I always had a problem with that. My mother would tell you and confirm that as a young girl, I always said, well, if there's nothing wrong, why are they trying to give us any money and settle with us? So it would be common for you to have these chemical explosions and the plants say, well, there's no harm to you. So pretty much what we're asking, we're going to give you a settlement. That settlement might be $1,000, it might be $2,000, but you're signing your rights away. So if in 20 years we find out that this chemical spill in fact caused cancer or some other harm to my body, I can't get anything because I've since settled with you. So I think of examples where, you get this money, and if you're in a underserved community already, this $1,000 or $2,000 settlement may be a lot of money, and if it's per person, so I'm able to file a claim for me and my kids, right? So I'm working at this law firm, and I was invited to a deposition, and they said that we were going to St. Charles Parish for a deposition. And so I said, oh, I'm from St. Charles Parish. That should be fun. And I said, can you tell me more about the deposition? And I'm quoting the associate who I was shadowing. Well, what happens is we represent chemical plant X, and they have explosions. No one is harmed by these explosions, but all of the local residents claim that they're having adverse effects in order for them to be able to get settlement money. So it's a class action, and we're going to go to depose the class representatives. She doesn't know, but my heart is racing because I'm like, oh my God, I'm probably on that list. So I said to her, when was this chemical spill? And she was like, oh, it takes so long for it to get to this point. It was in the early 90s. Early 90s, okay? I immediately say to her, by chance, who are the class representatives? I might know them. She proceeds to tell me the name of the two class representatives who were my aunt and my first cousin, her daughter. I call my mom, I tell her about it. I said, Aunt so-and-so and her daughter, your cousin so-and-so, are representatives for this chemical spill. And I'm in the bathroom at the firm, and I'm like, am I on the list? And my mom was like, she thought about it, and she's like, yeah, you probably would have been about 12 or 13 when that happened. And she's like, I'm pretty sure you're on the list. So I have to go out and tell them that not only can I not come to the deposition because I'm on that list, I am now a conflict of interest for this law firm because they represent this chemical plant and many others in this area. So needless to say, I didn't continue working at that law firm. But for me, it was a slap in the face to hear the mindset of the representatives from this law firm who represented this company. The allegation or assumption that the people in these towns are making up stories to get settlement money. I'm pretty sure it's not just Cancer Alley. Chemical plants are present all across the country. And I remember traveling to Philadelphia. I remember being in the cities outside of Minneapolis and realizing the presence of chemical plants. So this is a very real issue, and we often don't think about the impact that environmental justice plays on our health and overall how underserved communities, typically those minority communities, are marginalized. I can think of stories of chemical plants coming in and buying people out to build in what used to be residential areas, but we don't realize that the impact is, what about the people right outside of the line that didn't get bought out? So my house is still situated next to this chemical plant. I think about the people who run these chemical plants. They don't live in the communities. They typically commute into these communities because they likely know that it's not fit or safe for their families to be that close. In closing, I will talk about 2020, where the EPA Clean Act protections were suspended right around the time that COVID-19 began to sweep our country. And so basically what that means is these companies, they no longer have oversight in place. So in the past, there would be oversight that would say to these companies what levels of pollution they can put into the air. Unfortunately, there's no oversight right now for these companies. And in my last research, there's no end in sight. So you see, environmental justice is something that definitely impacts minorities and underserved communities. I would encourage you to do some research on how your very community may be impacted by environmental justice issues. As always, I sincerely thank you for watching. I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube video and hit the notification bell so you're notified when I post the next video. Until then, keep listening, keep learning, and keep being bold. Have a great day.